Hey everyone, Verivate here, and in this video I want to take a look at creating some augmented reality filters, which I'm sure, as most of you already know, basically just allow us to map any 3D models we've created onto people and environments via our phones or other AR compatible devices. So we'll be using Blender to create our 3D models, before then bringing these into Snap AR's Lens Studio software, where I'll show you how to easily set them up, as well as going through some of their different template files to show you how we can use this process to create a whole bunch of different filter types and applications. So let's start by coming into Blender and opening up a new project. And then the first thing we're going to want to do is have some kind of head or body model that we can begin modeling our filter on top of, which handily enough, Lens Studio has a bunch of as free downloadable resources from their website that I'll link in the description below. So then I'm just going to import this head OBJ, as what I want to start off by making for our first filter is just a simple mask that will be fixed on top of our face area. And I'm thinking for the design of the mask, to create something evocative of one of these intricate ornamental style ones that seem to be one of the most successful aesthetics in the AR medium, and which I think generally lend themselves really well to the technology, plus just look really cool. So the easiest and most effective way I've found to create something like these is by using Blender's grease pencil, which will actually allow us to just scribble directly over our reference model, instead of having to do any crazy or intricate polymodeling. So to set this up, we'll first add in a new blank grease pencil object, before then coming into draw mode and setting our stroke mode to surface. And now you can see we can just draw straight onto our face like so. So you'll probably want to set the strength here to 1 and lower the radius right down to something like 2 pixels. So we're getting nice crisp line work. We can also adjust how far off our lines sit from our face by changing this offset value here. And if you're wanting to create a symmetrical mask like I am, we can next add in a mirror modifier to our grease pencil object so that our lines will now replicate on both sides of our face. From here, it's really up to you how intricate you want to get with your line work. So you don't have to go as overboard as I'm going, but I guess I just wanted to see how far I could push this ornamentation. And I find once you start sketching, the patterns just kind of present themselves as you go, and you'll begin to see different opportunities for where you could take your design. So I'd encourage you to just freestyle it a few times, as I'm sure your own unique style will begin to emerge out of this process. Then, once we're happy with our result, we can now move on to the next stage, which is going to be solidifying our lines and beginning to give them some three-dimensional form and shape. So in order to do this, what we're going to want to do is convert our grease pencil object into an actual proper curve object, which we can do by first hitting F3 to pull up the search menu, before then typing in and selecting this Convert to Bezier Curve option. And that's going to create for us this duplicate here, which we can now see is all entirely vectorized line work. So that's great, but what we'll notice if we come into edit mode for this curve is that it's given us about 1 million vertices in the process, which is going to make it pretty tricky for us if we're looking to further adjust the shape of our curves later. So to simplify these, we can use another awesome command in Blender, aptly named Simplify Curve. Then we'll be able to adjust this distance slider to get our desired vertex density, now allowing for much easier manipulation of our curve handles. So now that we have our curves cleaned up and ready to go, we can add some thickness to them by coming over to our Curve Properties tab and under this Geometry option, increasing our bevel depth. And by default, this will be set to the round extrusion option. But if you're interested in creating a more custom profile, we can do this by either selecting from an object of our choosing, or my preferred method, which is this profile option here, where we can just draw in a custom shape on our graph like so. From here, we can now further refine the shape of our mask by moving around our curve handles and start playing around with things like overlapping and interweaving on our ornamentation. We can also mess around with our radius and tilt values per vertex, which I think goes a long way in creating a more free-flowing organic look for our mask by having this variable thickness and rotation throughout. So then we can just continue to edit and refine our mask until it's at a stage we're happy with. Before then turning our finished result into a mesh ready for export. By again searching our quick menu for this Convert to Mesh option, which we can now save out as an FBX file. Next, we'll move over to Lens Studio, where we can now focus on turning this into an AR filter. And as you can see, straight off the bat, we get a great range of starter templates to choose from here, which we'll get onto using in a second, but first, let's just start from scratch by creating a new project so we can quickly run through the basics. So we'll see for the UI, it's pretty simple. We just have our main 3D window here in the middle, followed by our resources and objects sidebar on the left, which you can basically think of as the view layer and properties tabs in Blender. Then over on the right, we have our preview window, which is going to allow us to view our creations in real time, exactly how they would be experienced in Snapchat. And we can pick from a whole range of different people and actions here to test on. As well as also being able to use our own webcam input if we wanted to live preview on ourselves instead. Then there's also this environment one, which would be more applicable to rear camera based filters. So to start adding in objects, we can come over to this icon here, where we'll be able to choose from shapes, lights, modifiers, and so on. Then to move and transform these around, we can just select this unified gizmo, which will give us this handy little gimbal. Now, to get it so that our objects are following our head, like what we're going to want to do for our mask, we'll want to add in something called a head binding, which if we now drag our box into, we'll see is going to follow along with our user's head. And you'll notice what our head binding also added in by default is this face occluder object here. And what that's going to do is tell our filter exactly where we want our object to begin being cut out by our face. Next, we can now bring our actual mask in by coming up to this import option and selecting our FBX file from Blender. And the first thing you'll probably notice is that we're getting this pink invalid texture showing up. And this is because at the moment we don't have materiality assigned to our mesh. So to fix this, we can select this Choose Material option and then select from one of these presets to create a new one. We can then adjust our material properties by selecting it down here in the Resources tab, before then tweaking the values on the usual settings like metallicness, roughness, base color, and so on. Then we'll just again drag our mask into our head binding and refine its position and occlusion to exactly how we want it to sit on our face, like so. From here, we can now look at adding something a bit more dynamic to our filter, like for example this chain physics preset in our template library, which as we can see has some basic physics so that when our user's head moves, these objects will spring and bounce alongside it, which can really be utilized for a whole lot of things. In my case, I want to use this effect to similarly create some earrings that will sway and dangle when we move around. So to make these, I first came back into Blender and modeled up a quick chain using some toruses. I then duplicated this a few times, along with adding in some little spheres and cones to give us this jangly looking adornment. Next, what we'll want to do is create an armature for our object so that we can roughly lay out the bone structure from which the physics will deform from. So generally, the more bones we have, the more flexible and jelly-like our object will be. So in my case, I'm only going to subdivide it a few times here, as I still want it somewhat rigid looking, typical of how a metal chain would normally move around. Then, when that's loosely in place, we'll again select our earring, before then selecting our armature and hitting Ctrl P with automatic weights to parent it to it, so that it now deforms accordingly. Now we can bring this rig into Lens Studio by again exporting it as an FBX, this time also ensuring the armature option is ticked. And with that done, we can come back into our file and import it. Now to get our bones physics set up, we'll come over to the properties here for our earring object and hit this Add Component button, before then selecting this script option. Now we can use our existing chain controller script from the template file by just inputting a joint value for each of our bones, and then dragging these in like so. We can then fine-tune our physics by tweaking some of these settings like force and stiffness to give us our intended look. Then, once we're happy with that, we can simply duplicate our earring for the other ear, before then bringing back in our mask to complete the look. From here, I just continued experimenting with the materials and adding in some lighting and effects, as there's really a whole lot of stuff to play around with here, so I'd encourage you to just try these out and see what you come up with. And the same goes for the template files, as there's heaps to choose from. So for me, I just continued on with this body mesh template here to create the same kind of design, but as more of a body armor style instead. And if you're interested in creating something more cloth-like on our body, we can also use this cloth simulation try-on template to set up clothes objects to be fully reactive and simulated in real time, ideal for digital fashion and similar applications. And it's really just the same process we used for our chain physics before, but this time using the vertex color of our mesh instead of bones to control the flexibility of our mesh. Then when we're done, we can just save these out ready for Snapchat by hitting this publish button here. So hope you have fun with it, get creative, and feel free to tag me on Snapchat or wherever else you create your filters, as I'd love to see your guys' results and what you come up with. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.